July 14th, 1994, City of London. A Christopher Wren church called St. Stephen Walbrook holds 200 people on a summer afternoon. And the most remarkable thing about the royal wedding taking place inside it's how unremarkable it's. No national broadcast, no barriers along the street outside, no commentary team installed in a commentary box, no formal dress code issued to the nation. Inside the church, built by Wren in the 1670s, its dome a smaller, quieter cousin of St. Paul's 8 minutes walk away, Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones walks in on the arm of her father. She wears a gown by Jasper Conran, layers of ivory georgette, a square-cut, corseted bodice, long sleeves that fall to her wrists. On her head, the Snowdon Floral Tiara, 3 diamond floral brooches originally given by her father to her mother on their own wedding day in 1960. She is borrowing something from that marriage, wearing it briefly, and then moving on. The ceremony lasts 30 minutes. When it ends and the couple emerge from the church, their driver hasn't pulled the car around yet. He didn't expect them out so quickly. Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones, Lady Sarah Chatto now within the last half hour, and her new husband Daniel stand on the pavement outside one of the most beautiful churches in London, waiting, while photographers document the pause. The image of the two of them standing there, slightly stranded, slightly amused, tells you something essential. This wedding was designed for them, not for the occasion. When you have planned something at human scale, you don't always account for the gap between the church door and the car. The reception is at Clarence House, hosted by the Queen Mother. The honeymoon is in India, a country she had first encountered on a film set years before, and where some of the most formative artistic work of her life had taken place. Queen Elizabeth II and the Duke of Edinburgh are inside the church. So are the Queen Mother, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Diana, Princess of Wales. Diana's attendance generates its own minor sensation. This is the first public occasion she and Prince Charles have appeared at since his admission of infidelity to Jonathan Dimbleby the previous month. Lady Sarah's intimate wedding has accidentally become the backdrop for a much larger story, none of which is her intention. She is trying, with characteristic precision, to get married as quietly as possible. Her brother had married at St. Margaret's, Westminster the previous year. Her cousins had chosen St. Paul's Cathedral and Westminster Abbey before that. Lady Sarah chose a Wren church with a capacity of 200, kept the ceremony to 30 minutes, and honeymooned in India. That isn't a series of accidents. That is a personality expressing itself through every available decision, and expressing it with a consistency that, tracked across a whole life, becomes something legible and deliberate, and worth paying attention to. The British royal family rarely lets its members leave. You are born into the machinery, and you stay in the machinery. But Lady Sarah Chatto looked at the chaotic, alcohol-soaked, deeply unhappy life of her mother, Princess Margaret, and made a radical decision. She didn't rebel with scandals. She didn't write a tell-all book. She simply walked away from the curse, and the palace actually let her go. To understand why that matters, you first have to understand what the curse was. Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, was born on August 21, 1930, the second daughter of the Duke and Duchess of York, a position that carried no particular constitutional weight until her uncle abdicated and her father became King George VI in 1936. In a single year, Margaret went from being a duke's daughter to a king's, and from being a cherished second child to being the spare. She was 6 years old. The spare role in the British monarchy is its own specific form of damage. The heir, Elizabeth in this case, had a future, a function, a formal purpose. The spare had a title, a position in the precedence tables, and a constitutional irrelevance that would deepen year by year as Elizabeth married and had children, and had grandchildren, and the line of succession filled with people more directly connected to the throne. Margaret spent her entire adult life watching her nominal position diminish while her actual public profile remained enormous because she was, in every way that the public recognized, exceptional. She was genuinely captivating. The historical record is consistent on this. The violet blue eyes, the wit, the repertoire of show tunes played from memory at the piano, the ability to turn any gathering into something worth attending simply by walking into it. The press followed her social circle in the late 1940s and early 1950s. The Margaret set, they called it, with the appetite usually reserved for film stars. She had inherited from her father both the capacity for great warmth and the expectation that people would organize themselves around her needs. The problem is that exceptional charisma, given no adequate formal outlet, eventually turns inward. She had wanted to marry Peter Townsend, the RAF officer who had served as an equerry to her father, who had been present in her life since she was a teenager. He was a divorced man. The government and the Church of England said no. In 1955, under pressure that came from every institutional direction simultaneously, Margaret ended the relationship and issued a statement confirming she had decided to put her duty to the Commonwealth before anything else. That sacrifice, made on behalf of an institution that gave her nothing comparable in return, an institution that needed her visibility without providing her purpose, curdled something that never fully healed. She married Anthony Armstrong-Jones in 1960. He was a society photographer, unconventional, creative, charming in the particular way that masks a more controlling temperament. Anne de Courcy, who wrote the only biography for which Armstrong-Jones ever spoke openly, records that in the first years of the marriage, friends noted the couple could hardly keep their hands off each other. He had an instinct for making things, furniture, photographs, emotional atmospheres, that matched her need for stimulation. Together, they made the country's most exciting, glamorous couple. Their drawing room, a place where the arts and the establishment met in a way that hadn't been seen before. By the time their daughter Sarah was born on May 1, 1964, the fairy tale had already developed cracks visible to people inside the household. According to biographers, Armstrong-Jones had conceived a child with a former girlfriend during his courtship of Margaret. He described his approach to relationships to de Courcy in a formulation that leaves little to interpretation: serial and simultaneous. He maintained several affairs throughout the marriage, including a long-running relationship with Lady Jacqueline Rufus Isaacs that Margaret only discovered when she visited him after a minor operation and found the woman at his hospital bedside. "I could nurse him, you know," Margaret told a friend afterwards. "When I was a Girl Guide, I got a badge for nursing." Margaret herself had a documented relationship with the Scottish aristocrat and jazz pianist Robin Douglas Home in 1967. Both parties, in other words, were living inside a marriage that had become a polite fiction, held together by a shared address in Kensington Palace, 2 children, and the institutional reluctance to acknowledge that the Queen's sister's marriage was beyond salvage. The precipitating public event arrived on September 3, 1973. Princess Margaret met a 25-year-old landscape gardener named Roddy Llewellyn at the Café Royal in Edinburgh. She was 43. Colin Tennant, a British aristocrat who had once courted Margaret himself, had given her 10 acres on the Caribbean island of Mustique as a wedding present in 1960, and by 1972, she had built a villa there called Les Jolies Eaux, the Beautiful Waters, where she could entertain in the sunshine without the press watching from the gates. She took Llewellyn there. The tabloids called him her toy boy. What he actually represented, in the account offered by Anne Tennant to a 2018 documentary, was something more painful than that. The first person in years who made her happy on a sustained basis. In February 1976, a photographer got onto the island. The images that emerged showed Margaret and Llewellyn in bathing suits on the beach, tame by any subsequent standard, catastrophic by the standards of 1976. Members of Parliament called her a royal parasite, wasting taxpayer funds. Within weeks, in March 1976, the formal separation from Armstrong-Jones was announced. Snowdon had already decided. He told Margaret's personal secretary, Lord Napier, that he was leaving. Napier relayed the news to Margaret in carefully coded language, speaking on an open phone line. "Oh, I see," she reportedly replied. "Thank you, Nigel. I think that's the best news you've ever given me." The decree absolute was granted on May 24, 1978. This was the first dissolution of a senior royal marriage in modern times, a fact the palace couldn't paper over, because Princess Margaret was the Queen's only sibling, and there was no framing device available that made it anything other than what it was. Craig Brown's 2017 biography, Ma'am Darling, structured as 99 vignettes drawn from accounts of people who knew her, documents what the domestic reality looked like in the years that followed. She forbade guests from beginning to eat at dinner before she arrived, and from continuing after she stopped, while eating very little herself. She cold-shouldered Princess Diana at social gatherings. She humiliated Elizabeth Taylor in a setting designed for mutual courtesy. Anne Glenn Connor, her longtime lady-in-waiting, stated publicly that Margaret had to give up smoking and drinking more or less at the same time, which implies both habits were equally embedded and equally serious across decades of use. Biographers, including Brown, describe her drinking as habitual and heavy throughout her adult life, though the specific daily volumes that circulate in royal commentary are biographical reconstruction rather than clinical record. She wasn't a monster. She was a woman of genuine brilliance who had been assigned a role that offered the appearance of exceptionality without the substance of it, and who spent her adult life trying to fill that gap with admiration, company, Llewellyn, late nights, and mystique. The tragedy of Princess Margaret isn't the behavior, much of which was rooted in a specific institutional pain. The tragedy is that the pain was survivable, and she never quite found a way to survive it. Her health declined steadily through the 1980s and 1990s. The smoking caught up with her lungs, and then with her arteries. She suffered her first major stroke in 1998. Others followed. Princess Margaret died on February 9, 2002, at King Edward VII's Hospital in London. She was 71. Her estate was valued at approximately £7.7 million, divided primarily between her two children. Her will was sealed. Shortly after her death, Sarah and her brother arranged for approximately 800 of their mother's belongings to be auctioned through Christie's. A practical, unsentimental response. The belongings were sold. The life had been lived. Throughout this arc, from the 1960s parties through the Mystique photographs, through the divorce, through the health decline, Sarah Armstrong-Jones was growing up inside it. She was born at Kensington Palace on May 1, 1964, at 8:20 in the morning. She and her brother David grew up in apartment 1A, in a household where both parents were, particularly the father, comparatively hands-on for the era. Armstrong-Jones taught his children practical skills: woodwork, craft, ways of looking at the physical world and understanding its construction. Margaret had her own firm theory about children and art. Take them to see 1 or 2 paintings at a time. Let them beg for more. That maxim is documented in Brown's book, and it suggests that whatever was failing inside the marriage, the engagement with the children around creative thinking was real. What was also real, and becoming impossible to ignore as Sarah moved through childhood, was the slow and very loud collapse of everything around it. She was at Bedales School, a progressive coeducational boarding school in Hampshire, during the worst years of the parental conflict. This matters as a qualification. She wasn't living continuously at Kensington Palace through the acute phase, but boarding school terms end, and children come home. She was just under 12 when the formal separation from Armstrong-Jones was announced in March 1976. She was 14 when the divorce was finalized in May 1978. Between those two events, in the spring of 1976, the tabloid photographs of her mother on Mustique with Roddy Llewellyn had already made front pages across Britain. After the separation, she and David divided time between their parents. Weekends at Nyman's in West Sussex with their father's family, time at Royal Lodge, summers at Sandringham and Balmoral. Tatler notes that at Balmoral, Sarah spent time with her cousins and developed her talent for landscape painting. That detail places her in the natural world, making something careful and lasting, in the same years her family was generating tabloid headlines. Something was being formed during those summers, an eye for landscape, a patience with the physical world, a capacity for attentiveness that had nothing to do with the machinery she'd been born into and would later leave behind. At 17, in the summer of 1981, she was a bridesmaid at the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. Standing in the procession at St. Paul's Cathedral, in white, as part of the occasion the whole world was watching. She was old enough by then to understand every layer of what that ceremony meant and didn't mean. Old enough to have already formed a view about what she wanted her own life to look like. There are no public statements from Lady Sarah Chatto about what she witnessed during her childhood. She has said almost nothing publicly about her mother, her parents' marriage, or her formative years. And notably, the silence isn't the silence of avoidance, but the silence of someone who has processed something and moved through it. What the biographical record does note is that in adult life, she has both a liking and a need for a stable background. Needs aren't random. They accumulate in response to what was missing. She loved her mother. Multiple biographical sources suggest this clearly, and her presence at Princess Margaret's side through the difficult final years reinforces it. She also came to understand, as an adult and probably as a much younger woman, that she couldn't fix what was wrong with Princess Margaret, and that attempting to do so would consume her own life in the attempt. That understanding, that love does not obligate you to inherit the person's damage, is one of the more hard-won forms of wisdom available, and Sarah appears to have arrived at it early enough to act on it. At Bedales, she left with a single A-level in art. Not a clutch of qualifications, not a conventional academic foundation. One A-level, in the subject that would organize the rest of her life. She enrolled at the Camberwell School of Art in London for a foundation course. Then came India. Lord Snowdon had been commissioned to photograph the production of David Lean's A Passage to India, filming in 1984. He took his daughter. She spent approximately 2 years there. The film's producer, John Knatchbull, 7th Baron Brabourne, a connection of the Mountbattens and therefore a relative by proximity of the royal family, gave Sarah a job as an intern assisting the wardrobe department and studying wood gilding under her father's cousin, Thomas Messel. This wasn't a decorative arrangement. She was learning craft, how to look at a physical object, understand its construction, and work with her hands in service of something exact and repeatable. India itself was doing the rest. The light, the colors, the landscapes, the particular quality of attention that place demands. Daniel Chatto came from a theatrical family. His father, Tom Chatto, had been an actor. His mother, Rosalind Chatto, was a well-known London theatrical agent. Daniel had appeared in small parts across a run of British films: Quartet with James Ivory, Priest of Love with Ian McKellen, Little Dorrit. He was a working actor from a cultured, arts-connected family, and he and Sarah met while both were working in the film industry. He proposed to her with what was described as a vintage cluster ring. This isn't a trivial detail in its implications. Daniel Chatto wasn't an aristocrat. He wasn't wealthy in the way the royal world understood wealth. He wasn't a name that carried social cachet in any circle Margaret had moved in. He was someone Sarah had met when both of them were working and apparently wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She was choosing a person rather than a position. The distinction is everything. Back in England after India, she returned to formal study. The Royal Academy schools accepted her. They are selective by ability, not by background, and royal connections provide no automatic admission. She studied there from 1985 to 1988. In 1988, she won both the Windsor and Newton Prize and the Creswick Landscape Prize. These are institutional records held by a body with 3 centuries of history. They aren't courtesy awards extended to someone because of who her mother was. They are competitive prizes in a rigorous program, and she won them. She also returned to Middlesex Polytechnic for a 2-year course in textile and fabric design, building technical range, understanding materials, developing the practical eyes she'd begun forming in India. By 1994, when she and Daniel married, she was 29 years old, with a decade of serious formal arts training, 2 prize credits from the Royal Academy schools, a 2-year stint in India that had formed her color sense and her relationship to landscape, and a professional identity that existed entirely outside the royal context. She wasn't playing at being an artist, she was one. The wedding at St. Stephen Walbrook on July 14, 1994, distilled everything about her choices into a single afternoon. That 30-minute ceremony, intimate, carefully considered, without the apparatus of national occasion, was followed by a reception at Clarence House and a honeymoon in India. The place where she had done some of the most formative work of her life, the professional art career she has built since then, is steady, specific, and entirely on her own terms. She exhibits under the name Sarah Armstrong-Jones. No title, no royal prefix, no marketing around who her mother was. Just a name and a body of paintings. The Redfern Gallery in London has represented her since 1995. Her practice focuses on landscapes, interiors, and still lifes, intimate in scale, attentive to texture. An auction catalog from Druitt's describes her work as noted for a particular focus on texture, be it Sussex chalk or the granite of the Scottish coast. Interior Scotland. Oil on canvas, painted 2010, acquired by the decorator Robert Kime directly from the Redfern Gallery. Gives you the scale. A personal domestic scene, painted small, sourced through a real commercial gallery by a real collector who sought it out. Beach, Norfolk, study. Oil on canvas, painted 2002, also acquired by Kime. Appeared at Druitt's in October 2023. South India still life, oil and gouache on paper. Provenance through the Redfern Gallery from January 1997. Sold at Roseberry's in September 2024. 3 decades of work, moving through a sustained commercial gallery, reaching collectors who return to her practice. In December 2015, the Redfern Gallery mounted a solo exhibition, Sarah Armstrong-Jones, Recent Paintings and Drawings. It ran until April 2016. In the most recent solo show of new paintings and watercolors, the gallery noted that over 3/4 of her pieces sold, largely expressive landscapes and natural forms rendered in rich, earthy colors. Designer and curator Patrick Kinmonth has described her practice as a profound contemplation of the world she seeks to know and the method she has mastered. This isn't the language of polite encouragement. It's the language of someone writing about a serious artist. In November 2018, Country Life magazine asked Lady Sarah to name her favorite painting. This is one of the extremely few occasions she has spoken publicly about anything at all, and what she chose to speak about was a painting. Piero della Francesca's The Baptism of Christ, painted around 1436 to 1439, hanging at the National Gallery in London. This painting by Piero della Francesca is in the National Gallery in London, and I always go and look at it when I'm there, she wrote. I love the progression of drawing, from the pebbles and plants in the foreground to the figures and then to the tree-covered hills and the town beyond. I find the colors and the drawing of the Italian landscape inspirational and each time I stand and contemplate this painting, I discover something new about it. One of the few on-the-record statements of her adult life, entirely about art. Nothing about the palace, nothing about her mother, nothing about what it cost to grow up as the daughter of Princess Margaret. Just a painting she returns to again and again, finding something new each time. That, in miniature, is the whole story. Her children followed parallel creative paths, neither inherited, both chosen. Samuel David Benedict Chatto, born July 28, 1996, studied history of art at the University of Edinburgh and now works as a ceramicist from a studio in West Sussex, describing himself as a British artist and maker, currently working in clay to create functional and sculptural wood-fired ceramics. Arthur Robert Nathaniel Chatto, born February 5, 1999, also went to Edinburgh, served with the Royal Marines, and has worked as a personal trainer and expedition leader. Neither carries a royal title. Neither has attracted tabloid coverage of any significance. The family attends art exhibitions together, contributes works to charity auctions. Lady Sarah donated an oil on canvas titled Studio Window 2023 to a fundraiser for Horatio's Garden, a charity supporting those undergoing spinal injury treatment. She told the press, "I am delighted to be able to help raise vital funds for people facing life-changing injuries." A single sentence about a specific cause in service of the work. Then, nothing. What is publicly known about the financial architecture of this life is appropriately limited. Princess Margaret's estate at her death in 2002 was approximately £7.7 million, divided primarily between her two children. Beyond that, the details of private financial arrangements aren't a matter of public record. What is clear is that she has maintained a sustained professional career for 30 years, holds gallery representation, sells her work through a real commercial market, and lives in a Grade II listed Georgian home in West London. There is no public evidence of sovereign grant funding directed to her as a personal income stream. She functions as what she says she is, a working artist who is also, by fact of birth, a member of the extended royal family. The palace's tolerance of Lady Sarah Chatto's private life isn't accidental. It reflects the mechanics of how the institution functions when someone chooses not to be visible and, crucially, not to be a problem. Working royal status isn't defined in statute. It's an internal institutional designation, reflected in who appears on official programs, who carries out public duties as a function of their royal position, and who receives support through the sovereign grant. The sovereign grant for 2024 to 25 totaled £86.3 million, allocated to the monarch, the core working royals, official staff, and the maintenance of occupied residences. Tatler states the position on Lady Sarah directly. She does not undertake public duties and isn't considered a working royal. She does not appear on the official royal family website's list of members who carry out official duties. The institution has never made a formal statement about this because it has never needed to. There was no announcement, no negotiated exit on the public record, no dramatic recalibration. She is simply not a working royal, has never been, and the palace has never found a reason to concern itself with that fact. Compare that to what happens when a royal member does trigger the institutional response. January 2020. Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, announced their intention to step back as senior royals. The palace responds immediately with a formal statement. They will no longer be working members of the royal family. They agreed to repay £2.4 million for renovations to Frogmore Cottage. In February 2021, Harry's honorary military appointments and patronages were formally returned to the monarch. The Canadian RCMP ceased providing security once their working status changed. A court subsequently confirmed Harry had lost his bid to reinstate taxpayer-funded security on UK visits. They retained their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. A common misconception holds that these were stripped, but they weren't. Yet every stage of their departure was publicly managed, formally announced, and generated years of ongoing institutional management. The palace spent years negotiating the terms of an exit that, in another family with different structural dynamics, might have been straightforward. Prince Andrew, in 2019, stepped back from public duties following his catastrophic BBC Newsnight interview about his relationship with a convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. He was stripped of military patronages, ceased to use his HRH style officially, and Buckingham Palace subsequently announced he would stop using his royal titles publicly, the announcement prompting Sarah Ferguson to also remove the Duchess of York designation from her own social media in the same period. Sarah Ferguson's trajectory after her 1996 divorce from Prince Andrew is its own illustration. She lost her HRH style, but retained the Duchess of York title as a courtesy. A 2010 tabloid sting, in which she was recorded apparently offering access to her ex-husband in exchange for money, confirmed her permanent exclusion from the core royal circle. She attended the Queen's state funeral in 2022, but wasn't invited to King Charles's coronation in 2023. Kept at careful, permanent distance from the brand. Every one of these cases shares a feature. The person involved had become visible, threatening, or financially complicated in ways the institution had to manage. Harry and Meghan generated ongoing reputational complexity and public conflict. Andrew generated legal and moral liability. Fergie generated financial embarrassment and tabloid material. The institution's response mechanism activated because it had to. Lady Sarah Chatto has given the palace nothing to activate it with. She doesn't speak to the press. She hasn't written a memoir about her extraordinary childhood. She hasn't appeared in a documentary about her mother's drinking or her parents' divorce, or about the specific and considerable experience of being the daughter of the most publicly chaotic Windsor of the 20th century. She attends royal events, the Queen's funeral, jubilees, Christmas services at Sandringham, in a quiet family capacity, in her own clothes, without press releases beforehand or interviews afterwards. She shows up, she is present, and she leaves. Lady Sarah Chatto is living proof that a royal who wants a quiet, private life can actually have it. But the proof comes with a qualification that matters. She could have it because she was far enough from the center of power that the center of power had no use for her, and because she never created a situation that required the institution to respond. Those conditions aren't equally available to all members of the family. Harry and Meghan occupied a structurally different position, closer to the succession, generating far more public interest, more financially and institutionally entangled. Their exit required negotiation because their presence had weight. Sarah's presence has always had affection rather than obligation. The Queen was said to adore her. King Charles visited her personally on her 60th birthday in 2024. The closeness is real and sustained across decades. But the Queen adored her niece is a different kind of relationship than she is the visible future of the monarchy. The former provides protection through warmth. The latter creates obligation and scrutiny that can become inescapable. One of those is survivable on your own terms, without an announcement or a transition plan. There is also a structural explanation for why the palace has no lever to pull, and it's worth laying out plainly. Princess Margaret was the spare. Born second to a duke, transformed by her father's accession into the spare to an heir, watching her position in the succession diminish year by year as Elizabeth's family expanded around her. She had no constitutional weight beyond the obligations of visibility. She was the Queen's sister, which made everything she did a matter of public record, and everything she didn't do a disappointment to expectation. Her children inherited an even thinner constitutional position. Lady Sarah is currently 29th in the line of succession, behind the Prince of Wales and his 3 children, behind Harry, behind Andrew's daughters, behind Edward's children, behind Anne's children and grandchildren. Her sons Samuel and Arthur sit at 30th and 31st respectively. At that distance from the throne, there is no succession anxiety, no constitutional function, no mechanism the palace can deploy to require participation. The institution can't offer her anything meaningful as an incentive, and can't withhold anything meaningful as a deterrent. She holds the title Lady, not Princess. The HRH designation does not extend through the male line to the children of an earl, and Margaret's children took their titles through their father's earldom, rather than through their mother's royal blood. Her formal title, Lady Sarah Chatto, is simultaneously royal enough to place her at family events and insufficiently royal to generate institutional obligation in any direction. She is twice removed from where the machinery operates at full pressure. She is the child of the spare, the child of the one who never reigned and never would, born into a position that the palace needed to display, but had no practical use for. The paradox is that double marginalization became a form of freedom. Princess Margaret's position as the spare was a source of sustained psychological pain throughout her life. She had the trappings of royalty without its purpose, the expectation of exceptionality without the formal context in which that exceptionality could resolve into something durable. Her daughter's position as the spare's daughter meant the institution had nothing to offer her and nothing meaningful to withhold. When Sarah chose a private life, there was no institutional lever available to pull because she had never been close enough to the mechanism for any lever to engage. September 19, 2022, Westminster Abbey, Queen Elizabeth II's state funeral. Lady Sarah Chatto attends with her husband Daniel and their two sons, Samuel and Arthur. The BBC confirms her presence, noting she was close to the Queen. At the line-in state at Westminster Hall beforehand, press photographs capture her standing alongside other family members, described as visibly emotional. One of the very few occasions where the camera has caught her in something other than composed presence. She was there because a woman she loved had died, and because this is what you do when someone you love dies. Then, when it was over, she went home. The Royal Ballet School appointment in June 2024 deserves clear acknowledgement because it complicates any simple walked away narrative, and the real story is more interesting than the simple version. Princess Margaret had been president of the Royal Ballet School from 1956 until her death in 2002. She was named president of the Royal Ballet School 22 years after her mother died, in a domain where she has genuine expertise, genuine artistic investment, and genuine interest built across decades. She didn't take the role immediately in the grief of 2002. She took it in 2024, when she was ready, and when she could do it on her own terms. This isn't a capitulation to institutional expectation. It's a voluntary choice, made in her own time in the field she has actually inhabited for 30 years. She attends Easter Matins at St. George's Chapel. She is ridden in the royal procession at Royal Ascot alongside King Charles and Queen Camilla. During the centenary celebrations for Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday, she was the only non-working member of the royal family to attend a second centenary event, appearing at the British Museum in a vibrant orange cardigan over a hot pink shirt under a navy coat, all smiles, greeted by King Charles with a kiss on each cheek. Tatler described her on that occasion as having eschewed any glossy outfits or press fanfare in favor of doing what she does best, getting the work done and celebrating family. That framing captures the whole thing precisely. She attends, she doesn't perform. There is no press release before, no interview after. She is present for the things that matter to her, on terms she has chosen, and she leaves when she is done. The contrast with Princess Margaret requires no argument, because the facts deliver it without assistance. Margaret's marriage collapsed in the most public possible way. Tabloid photographs on a Caribbean beach, a separation announcement in the New York Times, the first senior royal divorce in modern times. Sarah's marriage to Daniel Chatto, entered quietly in a Wren church in 1994, is now more than 30 years old and has generated no tabloid coverage of substance in all that time. Not a whisper of public difficulty, not a suggestion of romantic crisis, not a single headline of the kind that characterized her mother's adult life from the mid-1960s onwards. The marriage has lasted. The silence around it's its own form of evidence. Margaret's romantic life was documented obsessively from the 1950s onwards, and she was, in some ways, complicit in that obsession. She needed the attention even as she resented its consequences. The audiences at parties, the late nights, the circle of admiring friends who organized themselves around her timeline and her preferences, these weren't incidental to who she was. They were what she required to feel fully alive in the absence of any formal purpose. Her daughter's personal life before Daniel Chatto is essentially undocumented. There is nothing to document because she gave no one the material. She went to art school, she went to India, she came home, she built a life. None of that is tabloid adjacent. Margaret drank heavily and smoked heavily by the consistent testimony of everyone who spent extended time with her, including her lady-in-waiting of many years. The health consequences were severe and cumulative. There is no comparable public record regarding her daughter. Margaret needed a room full of people admiring her to function. This wasn't vanity in the simple sense, but the consequence of being told from childhood that she was exceptional, and then given no formal context in which that exceptionality could resolve into sustained purpose. Her daughter went to art school, won prizes at the Royal Academy, married a man she'd met while both were working in the film industry, and built a professional life in which her exceptionality resolves, every day, into a painting hung on a wall in a real collector's home. After Margaret died, Queen Elizabeth reportedly approached Anne Tennant, the woman who had introduced Margaret to Roddy Llewellyn, and said, "I'd just like to say, Anne, it was rather difficult at moments, but I thank you so much for introducing Princess Margaret to Roddy, because he made her really happy." Happy. For a few years, on a private island, with a younger man who was kind to her. That was the best available version of Princess Margaret's later life. Happiness found in a place the cameras could still reach, at the cost of a very public scandal. Sarah Armstrong-Jones found something better, not because she is superior to her mother, and the script that says so would be a cruder and less honest thing than her own life deserves, but because she looked clearly at what her mother needed, and at what it costs to spend a lifetime chasing that need without ever quite satisfying it. And she made different decisions. She didn't fight the pattern. She didn't dramatize her departure from it. She simply chose, early and consistently, and without fanfare, not to repeat it. She is 62 years old. She paints under the name Sarah Armstrong-Jones, not Lady Sarah Chatto, not Princess Margaret's daughter, not the Queen's niece. Just the name she was born with and the work she has made under it. She attends gallery openings with her son and his girlfriend. She joins King Charles for occasions that matter to the family. She is president of a ballet school her mother loved, in a role she took on her own terms, in her own time. She goes to the National Gallery and stands in front of a Piero della Francesca altarpiece, painted nearly 600 years ago, and finds something new in it each time. She has a husband who has moved fully into art alongside her, both of them working, in a life that has its own shape and does not require the monarchy to define it, or the press to narrate it. She never sought the limelight. In doing so, she became the most genuinely free, most quietly successful, most dignified member of her mother's immediate lineage. She didn't fight the palace. She didn't write the book. She didn't hold the press conference. She simply refused to inherit the curse. And in that refusal, she won everything her mother spent a lifetime desperately chasing and never found. Subscribe for more stories like this.